Welcome to BookTok for BookTok, a literary podcast where we deep dive into the writing of your favorite novels. This summer, we are hosting our Romantasy Edition of a book club while we prepare for a 15-part literary analysis of Sarah J. Maas's A House of Sky and Breath.
This is Jac.
And I'm Amy.
And each week we'll be discussing one book from our summer book club roster. By using our literary analysis background, we'll provide our first blush analysis of each book, as well as discuss listener thoughts. This week we will be discussing Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair.
I love that you hold up one of the sequels and not the actual book.
Fuck.
It's okay.
I listened to the audiobook. You were with me when I bought this.
Was I?
Yeah. I was like, look, it's a Touch of Darkness. I'm going to buy it for the podcast. You supported this mistake.
I'm sorry. I have no recollection.
How convenient. You black out for my mistakes. So this is our first video podcast.
Yes, first official video podcast.
Mm-hmm. We've been around for 2 years and here we are now on camera. I'm sure our listeners are shocked to see how we look.
Yeah, every time we go on a live, everyone thinks my voice is Jac's, Jac's face, and Jac's voice is my face.
Or the other times, people will be like, that's your face?
Oh, yeah.
And that's all they say. That's it. There's nothing else behind that. I'm like, I would like a little bit more context, please.
Yeah. Like, is it a good face?
I know. I mean, and I start fishing for compliments. I'm like, pretty. So, like we said, we are going to be discussing A Touch of Darkness, and it is a very popular Hades and Persephone retelling.
Mm-hmm.
And before we can get into any kind of analysis on this book or any kind of discussion, we kind of have to talk about Hades and Persephone. And there's like a whole genre of people talking about Hades and Persephone. People love a good Hades and Trying to find their power couple name for Hades. Hades-Sephone.
Yeah, I don't think it exists.
No, nor should it. And yeah, so the only way we can talk about it is by talking about the mythology of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked Amy, I'm like, can I start it? Because people know it as the rape of Persephone, but in actuality, people have just changed it to be the abduction of Persephone, because the word rapere is a Latin word, and that's where the origin of rape comes from. But that Latin origin actually means to take. So when they actually started doing more translation to the original text, it became a little like a better description to say abduction rather than the rape of. That is the one thing I remember from Latin class. Oh, I also remember Vini Vini Vici would actually be pronounced Winnie Winnie Wiki.
All 2 years of Latin in college.
Regretful 2 years. I think it took 3 years. 2 years, 3 years. I don't know. It was too long.
I just remember you were desperate to graduate and crying, submitting a final paper to Latin.
That is correct. Please let me pass. Please. All that to be, my teacher would be so proud to see that this is what I've used it for. But so the actual mythology of Hades and Persephone, you know it, right, Amy?
Yeah.
Would you like to give it to you? I just needed to get that rapere out there.
Sure. Hades is the god of the underworld. Persephone is the goddess of spring. She is the daughter of Demeter or Demeter, depending on who you are and how you want to pronounce it. I think the correct pronunciation is Demeter, which I don't like, but that's beside the point. She's the goddess of the harvest. And Hades, I always forget because there's so many different retellings what's accurate, but essentially Hades sees Persephone, falls in love, takes her to the underworld. Demeter, who is distraught with the disappearance of her daughter, causes eternal winter and does not bring about the season of spring until her daughter is returned to her. So Persephone is allowed to live 6 months with her mother and 6 months with Hades, and that's why we have seasons.
And there's other types of versions of this where when in the underworld, Persephone had like saw some pomegranate seeds. Some people say
Mhm.
that she saw it and had it. Other times Hades tricked her into eating the pomegranate seeds, and that's what trapped her in the underworld.
Mhm.
The most interesting thing that I like about Hades and Persephone is that in the art and sculptures of the time, Hades, and there's not a lot of sculptures of Hades because he is the god of the underworld and
Yeah.
people wanted nothing to do with that, but they're seen side by side and as
Mhm.
equals.
Yep. Yep.
And when you have Zeus to compare it to,
Right.
that is like you're like, "Oh, Nelly, get me a
Hades was
god like that."
right. Hades was actually respectful and made compromises by allowing his wife to go back to her mother. And
Wow, what a gentleman.
wow.
Someone get him
Compa-
that man a medal.
right? Compared to Zeus, who becomes a bull and has sex with women.
Or a
Like,
swan.
or a swan. Like,
I just why
no,
a swan?
no wonder why they're all so aggressive.
Yeah,
It's Zeus's fault.
it's Zeus. I just wanna know, like, who was that one person who came up with the origin, right?
Yeah.
And it was like they're, like, sitting there thinking about it, you're like, "You know what?" They're checking out like, a swan swims by, they're like, "Yeah, I could fuck that swan.
Yeah.
That swan fucks."
Yeah, I have to think that the people who justified Zeus as a bull and a swan just were really into bestiality,
Mm.
and
But swans?
I don't know what to tell you.
I guess that's a sexy bird. I feel like we've had this discussion. What's the sexiest of birds? Owls. It's a
Yeah,
sexy bird.
it's a sexy bird.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, this conversation went off the rails.
I mean, it's a sexy bird. I don't know what conversation. I think it makes sense. So tell me initial thoughts.
So, I wanna keep in mind that this is the first time I've consumed this book, and by consumed, I mean I listened to it, the audiobook version, which I think always has an influence on the enjoyability of a book.
Especially with the reader and if it's like a good narrator.
Mhm, mhm, and if the
Yeah.
the voice acting is good, and I have to say the narrator had great Hades energy. I I really, really enjoyed that. I other initial thoughts I would say include there were parts that were really, really enjoyable for me.
Mhm.
Some of the banter, some of the interactions, some of the I loved Hermes. He was
He
hilarious to
was
me.
really good.
However, I would also say that it was very rushed in other parts. I
Mhm.
and we can talk about that in more detail later. My other initial thought was I recently saw Hades Town the musical, and I kept seeing that cast, which was not a bad thing, but that's what I saw in my brain.
Yeah, I read this book years and years ago, and initially I was like, this is fun. Like, I had a good time. It wasn't something that necessarily stuck in my head, but I have also read like 117 books last year, so there's a lot of things in between to fill my head, but I I get what you're saying when it comes to it. The pacing was definitely an interesting pacing. I would hold the book to show you how thick it is, but this is the wrong book. So, I can't show you that. Do you have the book? I thought
I
you had the
don't.
book.
I don't.
What did I see on your counter then?
Some work related books.
Oh, well, there's that. Uh, I do feel like so going into the world building, I think that this was the first time that I read a modern retelling of
Mhm,
Hades and Persephone, and I did like the world that she built. It was fun to have the gods as modern, as if the
mhm,
gods came out, and it was very much a this is what's happening. Everyone
mhm,
now knows about the gods, and they're basically celebrities. Aphrodite has a clothing line, Hades has a club. And so all of that was a lot of fun.
mhm,
There was so much more I would love to go into that.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I it was surface level in the fact that not a lot of the details of how it works
Mhm.
was explored. However, I thought it was enough for a first book.
Yeah.
Knowing that there are more books that come later on, I felt like I got enough of a taste to
Mhm.
understand the general premise. I enjoyed seeing the gods. and humans interact and the nuances that that brings. I also enjoyed how, I guess in my mind, it's like Zootopia with gods.
Absolutely.
Fu
Yeah.
Funny how that's a theme for us, Crescent City.
Everything comes back down to Zootopia when it
Yeah,
with you and I.
basically. So, I found the world building sufficient for a first book.
Mhm.
If you think of ACOTAR, that world building is not as deep as it
Mhm.
is in the future books. So
Yeah, great point.
and I think to do more would be overwhelming and unnecessary for the plot.
So, I think it's a good point, and I thought about this in the sense of narrative style, and it is a total choice. So, I'm gonna compare this to Fourth Wing
Mhm,
in the sense of how we get information.
mhm.
I thought that Persephone did a good job of disclosing information of the world in a more natural-ish sense
Yeah.
versus a book like Fourth Wing where we get a whole thing of the world, like, within the first several pages. Not that one is bad, not that
Right.
one is worse than the other, it's a total choice of narrative style, and I think that St. Clair did a good job of pacing it out, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. The pacing is what it comes down to for me. When you have Fourth Wing, you have Violet reciting facts,
Mhm.
which is just a way to dump information. It feels like an ice bucket of water on top of you. Whereas
Yeah.
with the narrative style in A Touch of Darkness and the way it's like um drip torture, but in a good way, where it's just a
Yeah,
slow drip of information.
and you do wanna know more, and it is,
Right.
like, a good way of trying to get people to come back. Now, we haven't read the sequels and the follow-up despite owning it.
I'm sorry.
I know if this is the 2nd book.
I don't
I
know.
don't
I don't know
I'll
either.
have to check it later. Uh, yeah, I mean, like, it does make you wanna come back for the world, and I do hope that she does explore the world because I love this, like, New Athens and new other places, and, the idea of, like, the gods decided to show themselves,
Mhm.
and the idea that, like, Hades gave up on having to do coins,
Mhm.
to cross the river Styx. There's so many things that they showed, like, "Oh, here are the changes that we made."
Mhm.
And she definitely teed it up for another book, and when reviewing listener thoughts, that was one of the top, uh, comments that they liked was the fact of the world building.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's easy to get into. It's easy to digest, and it even if you know the bare minimum about Greek mythology,
Yeah.
you know enough to find this entertaining, and St. Clair does include, like, the coin thing to
Mhm.
cross the river Styx. That's not as common knowledge, but you're like, "Oh,
Yeah,
this is a fun fact I didn't even know, and I'm learning about the mythology in the process."
and I wouldn't consider myself of having a super in-depth okay, let me rephrase it. I don't consider myself a scholar of Greek mythology.
Mhm.
I know I feel like I know enough, I know a little bit more. Like, I do know enough, like, Adonis, Persephone I don't know if she fell in love with him because it makes me hurt for Hades, but, like, Persephone and Aphrodite in the legend had to share or in the legend, the mythology had to share Adonis, like,
Mhm.
Persephone kind of fell for him and was like, "Oh, he's super cute. I want to bring him down to the underworld with me," and they had to have joint custody of him. So, or the fact that she had to, like, she ate the seeds, the
Right.
pomegranate seeds, and at one point she does hold the pomegranate. So, I as someone who knows enough to catch those things, I would love to have someone who knows a lot about Greek mythology
Mhm.
to see if there's more that we missed, because I don't know if she did a surface level.
Mhm.
'Cause
Mhm.
sometimes it does feel surface level of, like, here's just a little bit of Wikipedia knowledge that I
Right.
found, but at
Right.
the same time, is that just me having that opinion because I have a surface level knowledge?
Yeah. That's fair. The extent of my knowledge is also surface level, and, uh The only reason why I know anything beyond the surface is because of the video game Hades, which I
Yeah.
played and loved, but even I don't know how much of that is accurate, right?
Yeah.
So, eh.
Well, it's I mean, we're not here to do that kind of analysis. That's
No, no,
maybe
no.
during a on season or a different season, but
Yeah.
yeah, I would that would be one of those, uh we had a listener who was like, "Hey, super into Greek mythology. Here's all the info. Love to share it.
Mhm.
Would love to know more about that, but, you know, don't have that time.
That's not what
Don't
we're
have"
that's that's not what we're here for.
No, I'm not gonna go get a PhD in Greek mythology at this time. Circle back in a couple of years, maybe I will. So, kind of continuing on with this idea of the modern retelling, and one of our listeners point out that they really liked the themes of gods being out of touch with humanity
Mm,
and their greater purpose to serve. And whether this was St. Clair's purpose or not, I really thought it was a good representation of power systems,
mhm,
government
mhm,
being in charge,
mhm.
making money, and not caring about the people who actually live in that world.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it's a great representation of celebrities in general in our world, as well as government. Anybody
Mhm.
who basically has enough money to not be in
Yeah.
touch with the regular people.
Oh, yeah, I mean, like, remember the pandemic and there's, like I
Mm,
mean, initial days with celebrities being like, "What do I do?" And it's like, "You mean with the home you own and the income you don't have to worry about? I don't know how you're gonna survive."
yeah, yeah.
It's super out of touch, and I think that I didn't really think about that, and it is a huge theme. Like, one thing
Mhm,
that Persephone really goes after with Hades is, "You're out of touch. This
mhm,
isn't what goes on." I think it could have been more. I would have liked it to be more. I would have liked Hades to be a little bit more out of touch because
mhm.
she was saying, "You're so out of touch," but it's like, "But he's still helping people." And then the argument turned into, "You can do more," which is fair, but I think if you're gonna make that comparison and show people being out of touch, I would have liked him to be more out of touch.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought because we know that Persephone starts out with immediate attraction to Hades.
Mhm.
But what makes her begin to, let's say, love him?
Yeah.
And I think it is the fact that he does do these secret acts of kindness and doesn't want the accolades for it. And so to take that away, to make him more out of touch, is there even anything to make him
Redeemable.
redeemable and for the relationship to initiate?
Touche. Touche. And no, and that's a good question. I think it comes down to my question of Hades as a character,
Mhm.
where he almost was too good.
Yeah, yeah.
Like there wasn't and I did like him. I thought his banter was great. I really do like this character. I wasn't sure of the levels and the depths. Like I'll say I know people have a lot of romanticized ideas of Reese, but you and I, when we did our analysis of Mist and Fury, we really got into a lot of the mistakes that Reese did
Mhm,
in
mhm.
the Court of Thorns and Roses series, and he was not perfect. He still isn't perfect,
No.
and but at the same time, he did really great things too. And I like that like Hades doesn't have to have that large of range. That I'm okay with that. And I
Yeah.
understand, you know, there needs to be things that she falls in love with more than I don't know, he plays with his dogs. That's enough for me. He threw a ball, Amy. He threw a ball. I was sold.
Oh,
Shirtless, might
man.
I add.
This is why I'm not straight.
This is what happens when you are straight and you're just like meh and single. You're like, a man can throw a ball for animals? My God. Take me now. Where are my pomegranate seeds?
I'll eat all of them.
Just walk around with seeds next, like looking for hot guys. Be like, I'm with you now. Please take me.
This is the sign, right? This is a sign that shows that I'm single.
Pomegranate? Anyone pomegranate seeds?
Oh, I forgot what we were talking about. Okay, Hades. He is not there's very little that makes him morally gray.
Yes.
And Hades, portrayed as a gentleman, I think is on point, but you can still be morally gray and be a gentleman, and I needed him to be
More gray.
morally gray.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that might not be what St. Clair was aiming for. St. Clair could have
Right,
very much been aiming for he's a misunderstood god. He was
right.
never morally gray.
And she achieved that, if that was the intention.
Yeah, if that was the intention, nailed it. She did a great job with it. This just goes into personal preference and taste.
Yeah.
And I like my men a little stabby.
Yes.
Fictional men. Fictional
Fictional
men.
man. Thank you. Thank you.
Other thoughts from our listeners because we asked, what are your likes and dislikes?
Mhm.
Try to keep it even. And one of the listeners said that the attraction and the love went from 0 to 100 way too quickly for them.
I 100% agree. That was one of my notes. The immediate attraction was so, I wouldn't say off-putting, but it threw me for a loop
Yeah.
really fast because it's not portrayed as a normal, like, ooh, attraction at first sight.
Mhm.
It's like all-consuming immediately. And I don't know that it was earned.
Mhm.
And there are other relationship dynamics that it was just constantly 0 to 60, back to 0, 0, 60, 0.
Yeah.
It was a lot of this movement of back and forth like in an earthquake,
I
and I
mean,
was
now
like,
that we're on video, people can see what you're doing.
yeah, but it was a lot. It was hard for me.
I think what St. Clair tried to do was fated mates,
Mhm.
essentially.
Yep.
And that's kinda what it felt like, was this,
Yep.
like, "Oh my god, we're meant to be." Because at one point, they do say that the fates told Demeter, right?
Mhm,
Is that the correct
mhm.
told Demeter that she was like, that Persephone was meant to be with Hades. So I think it was supposed to be a fated mate thing, and that was her trying to do fated mates without saying fated mates,
Yeah.
but I needed something to justify
Yeah.
the instant attraction.
Yeah, I agree. I think I understood in the moment that it was, "Oh, it's because they are fated mates." However, the way it played out for me made it seem like Persephone has no agency to
Yeah.
choose,
Yep.
that it's almost against her will and potentially non-consensual. Not that I'm saying the sex scenes were non-consensual, but the attraction almost seemed non-consensual.
Yeah. I think that's a really hard line to cross and balance when it comes to fated mates
Mhm.
between, "Wow, we're meant to be together," and, "Do you love them because you love them?" Or is this whole, like, you're being pushed together, therefore you're forced to love them, and you need things a little bit more earned beyond they're just meant to be together.
Right.
I think for me, I'm looking at one of my notes that I had, was that Hades was so clear in his intentions and his love for her, and she just kept going back and forth of like, is he only being nice to me because he wants the public to really like him? Is he only like, is the fact that he cares about me actually for this other
Mhm.
alternate reason? And like, Hades never showed that he was shady like that.
Yeah.
Like, why are you having these self-doubts when there's been zero proof for you to have that?
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, and I know some of our listeners expressed annoyance with Persephone in general.
Mhm.
I have to remind myself that Persephone is 19.
No, she's like 25, I think.
Oh,
She's finishing up college.
you're right, you're right. So she's like early 20s.
She's grown ass. I mean, not grown ass, but like
I'm gonna
grown enough.
I'm I'm gonna choose to believe her brain is still developing,
Okay, okay.
and that, I mean, 20-year-olds, early 20s, we are insecure
Yeah.
as human beings. And so I don't think her lack of logic was unbelievable from my perspective. I expect a 20 something to have yo-yoing thoughts that make no sense whatsoever because I was that person.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I gave her a little more grace than maybe she was due.
Uh, and I gave her none. I think that when I think about Persephone's mistakes, and like you said, that's something that our listeners did comment on, was how much they didn't like her thought processes on things. And for me, I think about the Adonis blackmailing aspect
Mhm.
and her wanting to handle it.
Yeah,
Now, I could in theory respect that, but her initial way of handling it was to go to her boss and see if it's possible for him to get his job back.
yeah,
Babe, you're not handling it, you're letting the blackmail work.
right. Well,
She eventually went and handled it.
yeah, I mean, again, I think it makes sense for a 20-year-old who doesn't wanna be the bad guy, who
There are
doesn't.
so many 20-year-olds out there that would be like, "Damn it, Amy, I wouldn't do that."
It's true, it's true. I think I don't know, for someone like Persephone who has so little life experience prior to college
Mhm.
and maybe hasn't faced that much hardship in interpersonal relationships other than her mother,
Yeah.
maybe she wants to treat every relationship with I don't know. Like I'm making excuses at this point.
Okay, no, 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 let's go with this thought process. I can be on board. So, to your point, she grew up in a greenhouse,
Mhm.
which would love to explore that more.
Yeah, I would love to know more about that.
Yeah, like, greenhouses are what, set at, like, a temperature of 70 something?
It's too warm for you and
I can't
humid.
handle it. Yeah, no, send me to the underworld with Hades. Shade. Uh, yeah, I couldn't handle that. So, if you do think about it, Persephone was absolutely locked up underneath
Mhm,
underneath in the greenhouse. We do know that she's gone to college and she's about to graduate. So, that's at least 4 years of socialization. It also shows that she does have a best friend, so she is able to make connections, but when we do meet Persephone, she's never been in a relationship and she only
mhm,
has one friend.
mhm,
So, I think it is fair to say that she's still working through her trauma
mhm.
of not being allowed to make friends and not being allowed to do anything, and she's very pacifying to her mother. She wants her mom to not she doesn't wanna ruffle her mom's feathers, she doesn't want to do anything that would make her go back to the greenhouse,
Yeah.
and I can see where that history of wanting to comply
Mhm.
would then lead to complying with Adonis initially.
Right, because in some ways he has become a stand-in for her mother. The way
Yeah.
he the way he treats her is the way her mother treats her. So, the
Mhm.
pacification seems realistic given how Persephone has pacified her mother her whole life. Think of it this way as well. If she only has one friend and it's her best friend who is infatuated with Adonis,
Mhm.
to what extent does Persephone not to want to disappoint her best friend because Adonis will go and tell her best friend, "Oh my
Yeah.
god, it is all Persephone's fault that it's this
Yep.
situation," and she risks the only relationship that she has.
And that is such a human thing of not wanting to upset a friend if they don't agree, like, without realizing, "Oh, I don't like this person, but I don't wanna upset someone
Mhm.
because they like them."
Yeah.
And I personally would have liked to see the friends outraged when it comes to finding out that Adonis spiked their drinks.
Yeah.
I felt like that was too glazed over.
Yeah. I agree.
I think that because I mean, he was out to assault her. That's what it
Mhm.
was. It wasn't just like a spiking the drink. And Hades' reaction, appropriate, like, that's
Appropriate.
great. But, you know, I would have the first interaction that we see with Adonis post spiking, I felt like it was too compliant, too
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
And I needed to see more outrage from her on that particular subject.
Yeah, I would say in general, I think Adonis got away with too much.
Yeah.
and never in my life would I have put up with any of that shit. So that is hard for me to read and stomach.
And nor should it be a thing that we promote women to put up with. And if it's not, if what you're trying to do is show that men can get away with anything, if you're trying to show that you're afraid as a character to push back because he might say something, then that
Mhm.
is a valid response. Like, I understand if women don't feel comfortable enough to say, "Get the hell out of my face."
Right.
But again, that's not what I'm seeing.
Right.
I want to see her struggle with, what do I do in a workplace?
Mhm.
I understand being in a workplace and having been harassed and having been in really awkward situations and not knowing what to do in that moment.
Mhm.
There was no grappling with her.
Yeah, there wasn't. And I feel I know it's realistic for her to not tell her boss when he asks, "Are you okay?"
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I feel at the same time like any opening is an opportunity. What I think frustrates me the most about Persephone is her inability to communicate.
Yeah.
And I think some of our listeners expressed the same frustration. And yes, again, I know at 20 something I was not as good of a communicator as I am now. But I wish we could have seen a Persephone. If I had written this novel, I think I would have tried to portray a Persephone that is both realistic but striving for what we want to promote in women.
Yeah. And like, I think her lack of communication and her lack of ability of being able to communicate would have been such a good character growth,
Mhm.
to see her struggling with that and finding her own voice, to
Mhm.
then being able to stand up to her mother, which we kind of get. We kind of get that moment where she goes up against Minty. She finally goes up against her mom.
Mhm.
I'm on board with all of it, but then I feel like it's all cut short by her not telling Hades what actually happened.
Yep.
And you kind of get that growth, you kind of get there, and then it falls a little flat of like, well, no, like, women should be better about being able to communicate what happened to them and being able to go for justice. That is something that we should be promoting. And it also would be not just promoting, but it also would be just a great character storyline.
Right.
And we almost get it.
Yeah, and for me, I feel like part of that problem stems from the power dynamics that we see in Hades and Persephone's relationship. And the
Mhm.
majority of that is because of their age
Yeah, yep.
and his status as a god, a known god, while she's trying to hide her identity.
Yeah,
And it creates this really uncomfortable stratification between the two of them that I think feeds into a lot of Persephone's actions, which I don't like.
yeah,
I I feel like Persephone spends a lot of time trying to look like a big girl to Hades,
yeah,
and that influences all her choices to not talk to him rather than St. Clair choosing to show vulnerability in her character, Persephone, and allowing Hades and Persephone to grow closer through that vulnerability. Yep.
so when it comes to Hades and Persephone, and we get this a lot, I don't wanna, like, bash St. Clair on doing this, she doesn't own this trope. We see
Mhm.
it in ACOTAR even, but it's the lack of power, it's the power dynamics, and the
Mhm.
fact that Persephone has 0 power in that relationship, and she enters it, even when it comes to the virginity trope,
Mhm.
and I struggle with that. We did, from Blood and Ash last week, and that's another virginity trope, and
You're
I
right. You're right. And I'm pretty sure next week's bride is also a virginity trope.
it is another virginity trope.
Shh. We did not plan that, guys.
No, and that's the thing, though, that's the problem, and it doesn't come from a place, because there's a place that I think you can really work with it. And that being women don't have to have sex. There are women
Mhm.
who don't have sex as teenagers or early 20s even, and that's a fair thing to talk about. That's a
Mhm.
really valid thing of saying whether it's circumstances or people women feeling uncomfortable
Yeah.
or women whether it's like uncomfortable with men or other women or whatever it is or their own body. That's a valid thing.
Mhm.
We're not seeing that, we're seeing sexy virgin.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. It's one thing I loved about A Court of Thorns and Roses is that Feyre was not a virgin.
Yeah,
She
absolutely.
she had a sexy friends with benefits before she ever met Tamlin, and that was so liberating, and
Yep.
as someone who still qualifies as a virgin, AKA me, I am turning 35.
But that's such a like, even that concept is such a heteronormative thought
It is.
because because then so virginity is a construct because
Mhm.
what is it? You're not you're you're with a woman. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's the thing where it's like, you're not a virgin. You are God, didn't mean to be airing out your sex life, sorry.
I don't care, it's fine.
But it's like to say that male penetration is what makes virginity is
Yeah,
bullshit.
yeah, yeah,
Men don't get to own virginity.
yeah.
If a woman decides to masturbate and if a woman decides to use any kind of toys before being with a partner, you can categorize that as losing your virginity. Whatever
It's
you
true.
want to define as losing your virginity, it gets to be you get to make it. That's you losing your quote unquote virginity. Virginity is a
Yeah.
construct.
Yeah.
And it's also and I hate that it's something that you lose too. It's like, "Nay." uh I think that what we get in a heteronormative world
Mhm.
is sexy female virgin.
Mhm.
I and it just is it's infantilizing.
Yeah, it is.
It's the lack of power structure. It's the lack of like, I know something you don't know. Let me teach you. Now, don't get me
Mhm.
wrong. When Hades was like, I'm going to teach you how to ride me, I was like, yes, please, sir. Go ahead. Teach her everything. I I understand the sexiness. This I wasn't reading it being like curse you. I was reading it and enjoying this. But
Right.
upon reflection, it is a trope that definitely bugs me whenever I see it. And,
Mhm.
I think that people authors try to salvage it by making them a little bit older and
Mhm.
saying, look, but they're still experienced. They've experienced the world, but you're still making them a sexy virgin. And then they
Mhm.
don't even portray, I think, I haven't yet to see a more accurate version of losing virginity because
Mhm.
even in the best case scenario, you still need a lot of other things happening. There's still a lot of other stuff in play
Yeah.
that it's not like there was a slight pressure and a little bit of pain, which quickly turned into pleasure.
Yeah, that's not how it works.
And God bless if it did,
Yeah,
to
yeah,
someone
yeah,
out
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
But, my mom's gonna hate this. But as someone who feels like I was very fortunate with my first time, you know, great experience. Would never trade it for the world for anything else, especially compared to a lot of like friends I had who hearing their first times was like an absolute shit show.
Mhm.
It's I think it is something that if we are having women read what a first time should quote unquote look like,
Mhm.
these aren't it.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's not empowering. It doesn't feel like he's making her feel safe.
Right.
It doesn't feel like he's making her feel like she's in charge. Things that I think should be considered during first times.
I agree. I agree. Unfortunately, what I feel like tropes like this do is it inflates expectations rather than manages expectations. And in some ways, do we assume all the readers have already had sex? Maybe, but I was
Mhm.
reading smutty fan fiction at the age of 15
Yeah.
or probably younger. So it did nothing to manage my expectations of what sex looks like, what relationships look like, what it means to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I think that we, in general, as a society, do a disservice to women in particular when we don't portray these interactions realistically.
And I don't mean to say that I want a book where a guy rolls over and starts smoking a cigarette and is like, "Go make me a sandwich, toots." Like, I don't
Right,
want
right,
that. I think it is fair to portray a scene that does show the best case scenario,
right. Mhm.
which may not be what we all have. I think that when it comes to romance, it's a great way of setting standards and expectations. Like, I
Mhm.
I do think that there is a side of that of saying, "Well, yeah, we should expect a guy to, worship my body. We should expect a
Mhm.
guy to do all of these things for me, make me feel safe, but the core things, but at the same time, not having the expectation that you're going to immediately become some kind of sex goddess right out the gate
Right, or immediately be able to orgasm
from
and
internal stimulation."
right, that's I mean, I'm not gonna reveal my entire sex life here.
No, no. But like statistically, that's really hard for women to do.
Oh, yeah, I mean okay, I am gonna reveal part of my sex life. Like, having been into my mid-30s before I found a partner who I was sexually active with, it's hard to find your rhythm with a new person. It's hard to figure out how to you both feel pleasure at the same time.
It's not even like, you know what? It doesn't get better with age. Like it doesn't it's like even with someone that you have fire chemistry with, you still need to figure out some things.
Right, right.
And it's also what I would love to see is more communication in general. And this is
Mhm.
not like harping on St. Clair specifically. This is the trope, the virgin, sexy virgin trope in general.
Exactly, exactly.
And I want more communication. I want more, hey, tell me what feels good. Do you like this? And that's the sense of realism that I want is that communication. And that's the sense of, I think it's both a standard that we should work towards and a realistic setting that like there are partners who do care about
Mhm,
your pleasure, who do care
mhm,
about your safety and your comfort and are capable of having that communication. We should have that as a very, that should be a standard for our expectations of men and women.
mhm, mhm. I agree.
So let me go into a little bit of what people like because I don't want to just like cuz they're good things. They're very good things.
There are good things. I haven't talked about all the things that I liked.
Yeah, is there a thing that you like to talk about that you liked?
I do like how sassy Persephone is.
Yes.
I think it is characteristic for her age, but it was it created great banter throughout the novel, and
Yep.
so I found that very enjoyable. That's what kept me reading.
Yeah. No, I think Persephone was a lot of fun. People are definitely like love Persephone, the Persephone story. People really liked the idea of a controlling mom.
Mhm.
I think that that was and I don't even have a controlling mom. I have, like, a very, very chill, understanding, great mom. Uh, now that I'm on video, I'm gonna have to curse less because now I feel like I'm gonna be in trouble more. But I even as someone who doesn't have a controlling mom, I love the idea of having a controlling character like that because at one point or another, we are going to have someone in our life that does try to control aspects of it.
Yep, absolutely, and it doesn't have to be a parent or a family member, but that figure exists
Yeah.
in people's lives or in their story at some point.
And I know a lot of people do have a controlling parent, so I'm sure it was
Mhm.
extra resonating for them, and
Yeah.
I think that's something that I do see in some of the comments from people. My cousin submitted her feedback, said, "Should I read this?" So I had
Sure.
to send her a text, be like, "Just send me a text, like, this is for submissions, Evelyn." One of the top comments people respond with that they like, and I guess we've already kind of touched on it.
Mhm.
Now as and that's the spice.
Mm.
Have I shat have I shat all over see, shat, mom, I didn't say shit. I'm already doing better. Have I crapped all over, Sexy Virgin? Yes. Now let's get into the things I did like. What are the spicy scenes?
Yeah, I conflicted because
Okay.
I feel like it was a lot of no, "Oh, we're getting heated, but no, I can't. I'm gonna walk into the other room." And then the sex happens anyway.
Yeah. But yeah,
There was a lot of that. Every
we're not gonna have sex, but in that other room we will.
Yeah, exactly. And it happened multiple times that I was just like, I feel like St. Clair wants a slow burn, but just can't. Doesn't have the patience for a
Yeah,
slow burn.
it was. That is so accurate. Because at first I was like, "No, it was slow," and I'm like, "No, no, it was not. It burned real fast. We got into it."
And maybe that goes back to the fated mates idea. But then again, it brings in my questions of consent. But were the sexy scenes enjoyable? Sure, absolutely.
Bath scene, love it. And
Love
the back
it.
of the car scene, it
Love
makes me
it.
think of, "Driver,
I
roll up the partition, please,
oh
Beyoncé.
yeah,
You
yeah.
don't wanna be seeing Yonsei on her knees."
It made me think of, what is that, Icebreaker by Hannah Grace.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that was a good one too.
That was a good one.
It's Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, the spicy scenes were fun, like, it's a good smutty book, like,
Mhm.
go into this with some fun smut expectations, and you're gonna have a good time.
Yeah, I think just go into the book with no expectations and you'll have a good time. And if you enjoy audiobooks, I highly recommend this one because the narrator's Hades was hot. Like, she was hot. She did a
Yeah.
great job.
Yeah, there wasn't a male Hades, it was all, like, it was her doing
She
all the voices.
Yeah, she did all the voices
You
and
know what, respect to her, yeah.
chef's kiss. She made Hades hot.
Good for her.
Yeah.
Good for Hades, good for us enjoying it. Yeah, I'm trying to think of other scenes. I mean, so I did like the "I'm going to carry you so that everyone sees that I'm
Mm,
taking you to my bed." Love a good
mhm,
old claiming. Love a
mhm,
good old-fashioned claim.
mhm, mhm.
As problem again, I get to choose what's problematic in my brain. I get to be contrary.
I get to put away my feminism when I want to.
I live in a nice compartmentalized box. I get to be mad about some things and then be like, "Yes, claim her.
Yeah, I understand.
Let everyone know she's yours."
Someone come claim me.
Pomegranate seeds? You know that, in, like, God, Mary Poppins,
Mhm.
the first one, where it's like, "Poppins, Poppins."
Romantasy.
Anyone on the corner, please? Anybody? Wow. Am I that desperate? No. Am I that single? Yes. Want to talk a little bit about another theme that we see in here, and that's the idea of worship.
Mhm.
And it was the big puzzle piece that Hades was trying to get Persephone to realize is that in order to become a god, you need to be worshipped.
Mhm.
And he worshipped her.
Mhm. Mhm.
I thought that was a fun little twist to things.
I did too. I felt like it was very satisfying that
Yeah.
that was the solution to her problems in terms of accessing her power. And I can see maybe it could be problematic that, like, oh, getting some sex is the
Is
solution.
worship. Well, I mean, yes.
But we are reading a romantasy book, so it is very fitting. I thought it was a great twist. I also really, really liked that how Persephone's power manifested was a touch of darkness within her,
Yeah.
and her accessing that darkness instead of it being all like, well, she's the goddess of spring, so it's all going to be flowers and sunshine, and she can only be good. I did like
Yeah.
that contrariness within her.
Yeah. I mean, the way that, like, whenever books say the title,
Mm-hmm.
I have mixed feelings about it.
Yeah,
I thought it was fun. Like when I heard the title, I was like, "Hey, hey, hey, see what you did there."
yeah.
I did like the idea of embracing the touch of darkness within,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding that you're not going to be this magnificent pure flower that her mother wanted her to be.
Yeah.
And when you think about Persephone and the god that she is and, springtime, you're bringing from death to life,
Mhm.
and you can't bring to life until you've touched the dead. So, like, even in her own representation of spring, you still have that touch of darkness because you're coming from winter.
Yeah.
And I do like the idea that Hades wasn't the only one that had her worshipped.
Mhm.
He did set her up to be the queen of the underworld. He did have the other souls down there really celebrate her. So it
Yeah.
wasn't just his dick,
Yeah.
you know?
You're right, you're right. I did really like the dynamics of Persephone with the people of the underworld.
Yeah, yeah.
I I really did appreciate that she was able to build relationships
Yep.
with people in the with individuals in the underworld, and that, yes, to your point, that they essentially began to worship her because they loved her as their queen.
Yep. Yeah, the underworld crew, Hecate, I really loved Hecate.
I really liked Hecate as well.
Yeah, I think she was a fun, wise character to have.
Mhm, mhm.
I really, really enjoyed the fact that she didn't meet Hecate and immediately think competition.
Yeah, I agree, I agree. She saw her more as a sage or
Yeah.
almost a positive mother figure
Yes, yeah.
rather than, yeah, competition. I completely agree.
Because Minty already has that title,
Yeah,
but it's also not done with it was justified.
yeah,
So, her being jealous and insecure about Minty made sense. Like,
yeah, yeah,
I didn't look at that and think, "Damn, you're just insecure." It's like, no,
yeah,
like, the first time you see Hades, hands take him away, like, of course, like, this other, nymph? She's a nymph? Yeah.
yeah,
Like, of course, she's parading around being like, "I like Hades, he's mine."
yeah.
And I do enjoy when books don't have women against women just for the sake of it.
Mhm, mhm.
I am all for having, like, a female villain that, like, we can shit on. Like, you know, we're here to support women, but, like, sometimes women suck. Sometimes there's certain women who just suck, and that's okay. And Minty is one of them. So
Yeah,
when you do have a second female figure, and I'm gonna say second because 'cause I'm comparing it to her best friend. So, you
yeah,
have that best friends, but then if you have a second female character who is associated with the male love interest, and you don't feel threatened by it, huge fan.
yeah. I
10 out
agree,
of 10.
I
Would
agree.
recommend. I'm thinking about my own writing, and I'm thinking, "Did I do that? No." Uh, is
Something to think about.
Yeah, it is something to think about because I think it is such a easy thing to fall into,
Yeah.
and St. Clair did a great job not falling into it.
Yep. 100% agree. And what I like is that that second female character is not related to Hades. So
Yeah,
if you think of A Court of Thorns and Roses series, more is
yeah,
related to Reese.
and
And
we're instantly at ease because he would never be with her.
exactly.
Yeah, it's a cop out.
Yeah, it is.
It's a way to make us feel like, "Oh, she's safe, she's not gonna be
Mhm.
threatened by her. I'm not threatened by her anymore." And I I'm really happy you brought that up because
Mhm.
it is such a way of being like, "Okay, cool. I'm now allowed to feel safe," which, like, don't get me wrong, that does happen, but I think it's fair for men to have female friends,
Yeah.
and I think it's okay for us to become friends with those women too.
Yep. Yep. My girlfriend is allowed to have female friends
Yeah.
that she spends one-on-one time with,
Yep, yep.
and I don't get jealous.
No, no, I mean, my ex, his best friend, who
Yeah.
he said like, he was like, "This is my best friend,"
Mhm.
was this incredible woman. She's like, she's the sweetest, most, lovely person, and I I understand that initial, like, "Okay, like, so tell me more about them?"
Mhm.
Don't get me wrong, there are, like, the female best friends that can be a little shady.
Mhm.
I do like the representation in books when we don't see the shady female best friend of the male character.
I agree. I
It's
agree.
it's refreshing.
It is refreshing
Yeah,
because those women exist.
exactly. Look at you and Randall.
Look at me and Randall. Not that he has a girlfriend to who has to worry about me.
No, no, but nor will a girl ever have to worry about you.
No, no, never.
It is, will they have to worry about me and Nicole? No, because we'll be on your side. We live with Randall.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just
It's
one big happy family.
it's like, God, every time I think about, like, why I think women should date our friend Randall, I think about the fact that you will always have tampons here for you.
Honestly, you will be so taken care of by the women in his life.
God, would you like to date Randall? Please send us an email at he would hate it, and I would love that.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
So I'm gonna read another listener thought, and they say, "It felt like there wasn't enough description for a lot of the action/scenes."
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm trying to think about what stood out to me from the descriptions, and I
Mhm.
feel like I got enough description of the underworld to be able to visualize it, I think. But but I'm looking back at my notes under world building and I I was more I was apparently more of a downer when I was writing my notes because I was like, does it make sense? Enjoyable, I think. Not sure I need more, even though I'm sure there should be more.
Wow.
Yeah,
Were you okay?
I, I think I was in the middle of Bride when I wrote those notes, so I was doing a comparison
Yeah, yeah.
subconsciously. Uh, now I agree that I think what stands out in my mind is the dialogue and the banter between characters,
Mhm.
Persephone's lack of communication and her inner turmoil. Nothing visually really stands out to me when I think back on the book.
Yes. And there is a scene that when I first read it, I couldn't visualize it,
Mhm.
and I have this, like, weird thought in my head where I was like, "Well, that doesn't make sense." And then listening to it again, I was still stuck on it. I'm like, I'm not my brain isn't forming the picture.
Mhm.
And that is when Persephone first goes to the underworld. And she goes through his office, she goes down some
Mm.
steps, and
Mhm.
then she's like she sees some water and then is blown. I mean, at one point, and then Hermes comes and helps her, and at one point, she says there was a blast,
Mhm.
and I thought she was blasted, and then I realized it
Mhm.
was Hermes who was hit, like Hades got rid of Hermes, and I was very much confused on that sequence
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
who was doing what
Yeah.
and what the area looked like. In my brain, I'm just thinking like a black void with like box see-through steps going down, and I it just didn't connect with me of what was happening there. And that I would say was probably the biggest action scene that there was in the book.
Yeah, there wasn't, I would say, a lot of action. Remind me if and correct me if I'm wrong, is A Touch of Darkness St. Clair's first book?
Let me check. That's a good question. I think that's a valid question. Touch of Darkness was published in 2019. I'm trying to see if she has any other books. I'm on Goodreads right now, scrolling through. It does look like that was her first book, and that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm gonna give St. Clair some grace on
Mhm.
this. If this was her first book, and I think is she self-published?
I think not now.
Not now, but I think that book might have been self-published.
I think it was.
I'm gonna look. Yes. So it looks like St. Clair joined the publisher Bloom Books in 2021. And
Oh, so yeah,
and
she
she,
was self-published.
yeah, she began to self-publish her books in 2019. Yep.
Yeah. And there is nothing wrong with self-publishing. I think,
No.
and I don't know what journey she was on. I don't know what editor she brought in, but it was
But
but I do see it.
yeah, it reads like a first novel. And
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that. Is it's I now if I read a novel that she publishes this year and it still had the same flaws in terms of unclear narrative and action,
Yeah.
then I would be a little more like, you don't get a free pass anymore."
Yeah, and I want people to know when we say it reads like a first novel, it's not an insult.
No.
And we talk about this whenever I recommend Throne of Glass to people. I say the same thing when it comes to the first book. I'm like, just so you know, it reads very young. It reads
Mhm.
like a first novel because it is. It
Yeah,
SJM
yeah,
wrote it very young, and she wrote it and it was her first book.
yeah,
Nothing wrong with that.
yeah.
It's okay, but, like, to your point, the progression of writing, that's when you go all the way to the end of Throne of Glass, you go all the way to Crescent City,
Mhm.
like,
Yeah,
you can see the development, and I love seeing a development of an author. I
yeah,
love seeing them become more confident in the world and their writing, and seeing them bloom with it,
yeah.
really.
I agree. I think that, like any other skill or craft, the craftswoman
Yeah,
needs time to develop that skill and
yeah,
hone that skill. Everybody has to write a first novel, and that's
yeah.
what St. Clair did, and I enjoyed this first novel.
Yes. I remember being told in a writing class that because Amy and I both we did our bachelor's in creative writing. I did my master's in comparative literature. Amy did her master's in higher education. And I remember in one of my creative writing courses, they're like, your first book's gonna be shit. Just accept it.
Yeah, well, and I think it was, in our last creative writing class, our instructor said, "You never publish your first novel."
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, and we had years of professors being like, look out for your first novel. Just be prepared for it. And
Yeah,
that is fair. It is fair. And I do give first time authors with their first novel a lot of grace
yeah, yep,
because I have a lot of sympathy, I have a lot of heart.
yeah,
Uh, that's why I like went and wrote like basically a fan fiction novel that I was like length novel where I'm like, okay, now you will be my bad one.
yeah.
And then and now I've written another book and I'm like, okay, but are you my bad one now?
Well, my fantasy novel, I wrote that thing, and I have such a hard time editing it that I'm like, "You are the first novel that will never see the light of
Yeah,
day."
like you're it. You're the first one. We're fine. Goodbye. Love you.
Yeah,
Off to the river Styx you go.
yeah, yep,
Here are some
exactly.
coins.
Yeah, Karen will take you down the river.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
go with him.
Waving goodbye. Yeah, and for a first novel, I think she did a good job.
I think so too. Now, does that mean that there are areas for improvement? Yes.
Yeah.
Some of the narrative descriptions, action, and not action as in fight sequences, just physical
Yeah.
ma- manifestation of individuals.
Going from one room to another, who's in what location? Because I did catch myself a few times of being like, "So who's in the room right now?
Mhm.
Where is what? Who's
Yeah.
on first?
Yeah.
What's on second?"
Yeah. Yep. So, yeah, and having not read the rest of the series, I can't tell you whether or not the narrative style.
So some of the feedback I got from some listeners is that they didn't care for other parts of the rest of the series.
Mhm.
We can't speak to it. I don't know, but they did
Yeah.
say that they felt like the characters shifted quite a bit and that things took a left turn. I know that the other books or at least the next book I think does dive more into the characters of Persephone and Hades. And I know having follow-ups with the same characters after their happily ever after is hard to read
Mhm.
because their this plot is based off of their relationship.
Yeah.
So you can't have another book that goes into it without having conflict.
Right.
It's not like Wings and Ruin and Mist and Fury and Farah and Reese finally get together. The plot was never there. Like there was more plot going on
Yeah.
that could carry it through. So when they got
Right.
together, you didn't have to necessarily add relationship tension. So there was a certain piece about it of saying, "Oh, these characters that I love so much, they're together, they love each other. I'm happy." if you read this first book and you love these characters and you're happy, and then the next books end up being about conflict, I can see if that is, I don't know,
Yeah.
I can see that being hard because
Yeah.
now you have to create scenarios where they don't get along and they, maybe there is more miscommunication. Where is that conflict?
Yeah.
So I can see that being hard for a reader of being like, no, you guys are so perfect and we're happy at the end.
Yeah. It's true. I I do feel like I don't need to read anything else. I think some of our readers who have read more of the series said a lot of the same problems keep coming up in terms of like miscommunication,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you can only use the miscommunication trope so much.
Yep.
And yeah, I don't feel the need to find out anything else.
No, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm happy. If this was a standalone, I think it would have been it's fine as a
Yeah.
standalone.
I think it would have been great.
Yeah. I don't know about I would have loved the second book to be just about from, Aphrodite's point of view. Again, I don't
Mm,
know, I haven't read it, but if that was the case, I think that would have been a great one to look into,
yeah, I agree. I agree.
hop around all the gods.
Yeah, I think St. Clair has come out with a version of this book from Hades' point of view.
I remember when I first listened to and first read, A Touch of Darkness years ago, and she did come out with that Hades version, I DNF'd it.
Oh,
And I did love Touch of Darkness so much initially that I was like, "Oh my god, like, I would love to like, I want more." And then it was Hades' perspective, and I think for me personally, it was too much of the same thing. That's on me, like,
mm,
that was the fact that I was shocked that I'm like, "This is the same thing," and I knew it was the same thing, but my little reader brain was like, "Does not compute, I don't like this."
yeah.
And I think because there was so much the plot is the relationship,
Mhm, mhm.
and there was just so much of the 2 of them that it, like, was, like, these same scenes that I'm like, "I'm getting these all over again,"
Mm,
which isn't like, that's on me. I'm the
right.
one who didn't, like, wrap their head around it, but, yeah, I can also see why people would like it and why people wouldn't like that.
Yeah, I think if St. Clair rewrote it, the A Touch of Darkness, it would be one of those novels that's a dual POV because that's
Yeah.
now more commonplace.
Yes.
I can't speak to 2019, I wasn't reading Romantasy back then, but I could see the change,
Yep.
being beneficial rather than having 2 separate books.
I think that this would have been and there's some books who's the Bone season and the one who did Priority of an Orange Tree,
Samantha Shannon.
Samantha Shannon, thank you. So, from what I understand, Samantha Shannon went back to one of her earlier books called The Bone Season. I love The Bone Season. It is a book I read forever ago. It is YA. I don't care. I loved it. And I think she did go back and kind of not rewrite the whole thing, but kind of, refined it from what I understand. I haven't read it. And I think I would love that to be more common for authors
Yeah, I
to
agree.
go back and say, okay, here's how I would elevate it.
Yep.
And this would be a great example of how would she elevate it? How would she rewrite some scenes? How would she have the dual point of view for these? How does that work out? And I would love that to be more commonplace with authors.
Yeah, I mean, that's why first, second, third editions exist. It's because they went back and revised it, and right now in our society, that's reserved for textbooks,
Yeah.
but it used to be more common that you would correct errors.
And you can make more money, writers. I'd go buy it.
It's the publishers,
Yeah.
I don't know how risky it is to be like, "We're gonna market this book for a second time, and the story doesn't change."
If Taylor can do it and come up with her version, then by golly, I would love it. I mean, if SJM put out ACOTAR again and said, "Hey guys," I mean, I think that book is like
That
near
book
perfection.
Yeah, that book is perfect.
Yeah, and if no one understands what we're saying, like, go and listen to our ACOTAR season, because the way that she thought it out and the work she did behind it, it is chef's kiss.
It is
But
chef's kiss.
I'll use Throne of Glass. If she decided to
Mm.
come back to Throne of Glass, a book that she wrote, I think when she was 16, and
Mhm.
she said, "Hey, this is how I, a writer who has been doing this now for half my life, my main career, this is how I would go and bring it back and revise it, not changing the story, but just enhancing it."
Mhm.
I think readers would eat it up.
Oh, I would eat that shit up. She could, rewrite the first 3,
Yeah.
and I'm all for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's change the publishing industry with this episode.
Sexy Chicken Publishing House.
Sexy Chicken Publishing House. Uh, that's our unofficial mascot is a sexy chicken.
Yeah, it is.
That's official at this point.
Oh, it is official.
Yeah.
Check out our t-shirts for this year's book club.
Yeah.
It's on our Etsy shop. We've got some sexy chickens. We've got
If
some books.
if people go and look at it and say, "Why are there chickens there?" Season 2. Season 2, where we cover Mist and Fury. Go for that. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Book Talk for Book Talk. We encourage you to rate and subscribe to our show on your preferred podcast listening platform. Next week, we'll be discussing Bride by Ali Hazelwood.
We encourage you to rate and subscribe to our show on your preferred podcast listening platform. We would love to hear your thoughts based on today's conversation. If you would like to submit your take on any of the books we plan to discuss later this summer, please be sure to follow us on Instagram, where we ask for listener submissions.
If you're enjoying the podcast, please visit our website, booktalkforbooktalk.com, to view our latest merch and learn about supporting the show through Patreon, Ko-Fi, or Venmo. You can also follow us on TikTok or Instagram at the handle booktalkforbooktalk. Bye.
That was not well timed.
It's hard on video.
It is hard on